Welcome back to Collateral Banter, episode 50. I'm your host, Danny T. And of course, I love being on the airwaves and talking politics. That's what we do here on this show. It's all political here and more sociological, cultural. We talk about everything, anything and everything that comes to my mind. I first want to say that I've been sick for the last couple of weeks. Whatever that flu was, it hit me on the first day of the year. I was sick up until the end of last weekend. Yeah, this is the first episode of 2020. I have reached 50 episodes for Collateral Banter, so I'm excited about that. And I have really nothing to say, really. Everything's been resolved, and there is nothing going on around the world, and everything's been fixed. Can all go home and stop podcasting. Because, you know, that's America's new pastime, I guess, is to go out there. It's no longer to watch baseball. Nope, nobody's doing that. We're all podcasting. Every day of our lives, actually, from the moment we wake up till the moment we go to bed. It's podcasting all day. All right, so I have an exciting episode for episode 50. I want to talk about truth on this episode, but before I do, I feel that I need to discuss the Iran-U.S. situation that we have brewing. So today is January 13th. A couple weeks back, Donald Trump executed an Iranian general, Qasem Soleimani, and in Iraq. And clearly, this has set a chain reaction of events, both here in the United States and abroad. Many people think that he's doing this to distract from the impeachment trials that are coming up. This was another wag the dog situation, like Bill Clinton when he faced impeachment and bombed Afghanistan. So there's that aspect of it. But some parts of it just doesn't make sense to me about what's going on. And I think this is indicative of the world we live in today. Okay, so from what I know, and I haven't followed it as closely as I should have because I was mainly sick, but from what I'm gathering, today NBC reported that Trump had given the go-ahead to kill Soleimani 7 months ago. All right, we start there. But killing him in Baghdad's airport, first, isn't that a violation of sovereignty given that there is an Iraqi government? Are you allowed to just go into your country and execute a foreign general who is leading the Iranian army and militia in Iraq? Are you allowed to kill them? Well, Trump claims he has the authority to do so under the Authorization for Use of Military Force, AUMF, which people are probably just finding out about. But really, what's underpinning all of that is this unlimited executive authority that currently exists. It's been brewing now since Bush administration, since 9/11, or days after. And it just doesn't make any sense to me. So apparently the Iranian general in Iraq was set to hold peace talks with a representative of the Saudi government. And so it looked like there could be a ceasefire in hostilities, which would be a good thing, you would think. And that's when they decided to execute him by drone strike. So let's see. You don't get authority to attack a country that technically now has a government. You violated their sovereignty, and it's because, well, the Iranian guy, as the news has been pumping out, is supposedly a terrorist, which he's actually a general and under orders from Iran. So it's this like mishmash of things. Here is the thing that I think most Americans forget, that they shouldn't forget, is that when you had ISIS invading Iraq, it wasn't the Iraqi government, it wasn't the Iraqi military that withstood the ISIS assault and repelled ISIS and defeated ISIS in Iraq. No, I know people think that there's this alliance between Iraq and Iran, and there is. But Iran is carrying the heavy load of fighting in Iraq. So let's see. It's Iranian militia, and it's Soleimani who is the one who is fighting against ISIS, and America is on Iran and Soleimani's side then, right? So they were once together, not as allies, but as we have a mutual enemy. And of course, Iran saw ISIS as a threat to Iran. So they repelled and defeated ISIS along with the United States military. So you both have interests that are aligned. But obviously, it's now in Iran's interest after defeating ISIS to push back against U.S. influence in the country. Now, see, this is where it gets so muddy and complicated already. It's already muddy and complicated. But essentially, the way I look at it is United States is now allied in the region strongly behind Saudi Arabia. It was Trump's first visit outside the United States. He has built a very strong alliance with the Saudi government. And it's really interesting to see that it's I think in many ways Trump got rid of Soleimani because he was doing a really good job in extending Iranian influence throughout the Middle East, effectively. He had secured Iraq. He had pushed his allies in Yemen. He had essentially instigated Iranian proxies throughout the region and consolidated their power and force. If they're not allied with Iran, they're certainly friends and working together. So he was actually rather successful in extending Iranian influence throughout the region, and Saudi just doesn't have that capability, so they call in their allies, the United States, to take out the person who is apparently running the show so effectively throughout the region. And of course, you can look at extending Iranian influence as terrorism, because that's just how the elites somehow just speak to everybody and say, hey, if they oppose our interest and our values, they're terrorists. Well, if that's the definition, then there's a lot of terrorism going on around the world. There's no really good definition for that, except that it's acts that are intent to fear and intimidate populations. So it's like, well, isn't war that really? And then isn't Saudi's bombing of Yemen also that? So it's like, okay, Iran is extending terror and influence in Iraq and in Yemen and other countries, but it's not like other countries aren't fighting back. And so that does bring me to another point inside Iraq. Not everybody is pro-Soleimani and the Iranians. They certainly are the majority, and that's what you get when you have parliamentary system, as dysfunctional as it may be, and it is very troublesome and has a lot of problems and corruption that we can't even fathom. But Iraq is still a country that has competing and conflicting interests. It's so interesting. Everybody always breaks it Sunni Shia, and it's like, no, it's regional, different political visions that you see in the country. Should there be a stronger central government versus a weaker central government? There's a lot of oil in the Kurdish region in the northern Iraq. It's interesting how the Iraqi domestic situation impacts this move by Trump. Also, did Trump declare war on Iran? If you kill a general, you did, but then what gives you the authorization to go and declare war without Congress? I was pretty sure that you can do that, but then you have to submit a request for declaring war to Congress eventually. If not, I think it's 90 days after taking that strike. So a lot of questions, a lot of them not answered. This, again, it's so hard to know the impact of this because we will only see the impact months in the future. And then interestingly, and something completely out of control, but because that all happened and tensions were at its peak, Iran decides to attack U.S. bases, but tells the Iraqi and the Americans indirectly that missiles are coming their way. The military soldiers, nobody dies, stays in bunkers. The Iranians then say that they struck back at the Americans, and then they lie to their population, if I'm not mistaken here. And this I'm getting from a third-hand source, that Iranian TV was saying that 80-something soldiers in the U.S. died in Iraq. And, well, I have checked a lot of newspapers, and nobody is saying that. But that story could be out there to convince the Iranian people that we struck back and killed 80 of their soldiers. I don't know if there's any confirmation of that. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe I'm making that up. But from what I heard, that the Iranian TV was claiming that a lot of soldiers were dead after their missile attacks in Iraq. That situation is... So now, that situation is so explosive because Trump killed Soleimani. Iraq now is demanding that American troops leave the country. And of course, in a Trumpian style, they first say, okay, we'll leave. And then behind the scenes say, no, not really. And it's sort of left in this world of, are you leaving or not? But the Iraqi government is asking you to leave. So that is happening. Yeah. And let me ask the listeners of this show, if the U.S. leaves Iraq, who gains from that except the Iranians, right? And I think that that's what a lot of people on the left don't exactly see, is that if the U.S. retreats from all of these global expeditions, of which, for the record, I am largely in favor of in almost all situations, but when the United States steps back, regional powers fill up the vacuum and begin to influence and spread their interest and to consolidate their interest abroad. That isn't a justification for the U.S. staying abroad, but it is to say that people are pushing the U.S. out of Iraq because, Iran wants to consolidate full control, push back Saudi influence, Saudi and its allies from Iraq, and wants to continue to extend Iranian influence throughout the region. It is quite a dynamic situation, but this is all now happening in light of a bombing or a shooting down of a plane in Iran headed to Kiev, Ukraine, that killed Canadians and Ukrainians, Iranians, Canadians, Ukrainian people from all around the world. And the government of Iran initially denied that it was shot down, and then it came out and actually said, it was an accident and a mistake. And this has led to widespread protests. Now, that brings up an interesting situation. If people go back to the month of November, there were widespread protests throughout Iran because of the sanctions applied by the United States. And the economic situation in Iran was just falling apart, and people were protesting government corruption and incompetence and all of that stuff. And apparently the Iranian regime authorized a major crackdown that I heard about at least killed hundreds. And I've seen reports in this northern region of Iran that killed 1,500 people. 1,500 people were potentially killed in the northern region of Iran to bring down protests, and this happened in November. Now, here's the thing. Because you killed Soleimani, the hardliners and the regime in power were able to go out to the people and say, look, this is the imperial power coming back, trying to take control of the country and of the oil interests. And look what they did. They killed this general, and Soleimani has this figure of like, they're not all that, he was not all that hated, because a lot of his acts are outside of Iran, even though he does lead the Quds forces, and I guess they were recently designated a terror organization, so he leads that elite troop that would make him the head of a terrorist organization designated by the United States only recently, but at the same time, it is an organization that is the military, a special military force. With my brain can't even fathom all of that complexity that is added there. But I'm throwing out some of the things that are coming to my mind when I think about that situation. And I didn't even mean to talk about this for so long, but it's one that is obviously playing itself out. And again, I don't really believe the Democrats are as angry with killing Soleimani. If you read the news and read what most reports, people are very happy secretly that Trump did that, for the most part, among the Democratic congressmen and elected officials. I'd say the Democratic base is probably in line with what I have said and critiqued about sovereignty, about killing a government official, the implications globally for it, violating Iraqi sovereignty. Now you're going to be kicked out of Iraq, although Trump said he wants to leave. But if he were to leave, that would only strengthen Iran. If Trump were to pull out troops from Iraq, that would only strengthen Iran in the region, and it would weaken the sort of balance of power, because I think Iran right now is probably the strongest country in the region. Of course, the sanctions have taken a huge hit. There were widespread protests. People forget there's been some large-scale protests all throughout Iran, even going back to 2008 with the sort of green movement that people haven't discussed. So it is an interesting event that is taking place currently. I'm not sure how it's all going to shape out. I think we'll know the next few months. I thought Iran would going to start attacking sort of oil tankers and block the Strait of Hormuz, and maybe they're planning to do that closer to the election, to try to influence the election, to try to create a political crisis in the Middle East as November rolls around. So, but what I really wanted to talk about on this episode, and maybe I'll only do it for a few more minutes, is previous Democratic administrations. So here I'm thinking of Bill Clinton, Obama. So I was at a bookstore a couple days ago, and there were some kids. They looked like they were in like teenage years, 12, 13 or something like that. I think they saw a book with either Obama's face cover, and they said something to the effect of, "Oh, Obama, I love the person, but he didn't get anything done. You know, he didn't really challenge anything. He didn't make any changes, but I still love him." You know, that caught my attention because, you know, I'm always eavesdropping on everybody around me. I don't know why. They went on to, "Oh yeah, but he's definitely better than Trump." And then something like, but still Obama was better than Clinton. And then, so I heard that, and then on the radio today, I was listening to a Tom Hartman show. From that, I heard a person call in, and for one of the first times that a Democrat decided to defend Bill Clinton on his show and to challenge the narrative of more progressive-leaning Democrats that everything Bill Clinton did was bad. And so what I am asking, I guess, listeners is, how do we make sense of this world? In the sense that every president does good and bad things, okay? And how we weight that, I guess, might decide if we're conservative or liberal or progressive or traditionalist or whatever terms we want to give ourselves. But the truth itself is a muddied thing. There isn't the truth. There are, in my view, many truths. And I think we place judgment on those truths. So if I were to say, as the caller did on Tom Hartman's show, and defend Bill Clinton, he's talking about, well, look, there were 23 million jobs, and the number of people on the welfare rolls dropped before he enacted the Welfare Reform Act. He balanced budget. We had a couple years of budget surpluses under Bill Clinton. And so, you know, the guy is, again, looking at Bill Clinton's record sort of from a macro perspective and not drilling down on what actually was accomplished or not, or regressed, right? Because I think in reality the way we should understand things is there's progress, there's always a darkness in progress, right? There's always a regression in progress. As we think we're progressing, there is a regression, right? I could take apart that 3% growth under Bill Clinton. It averaged that for a while. Real wages rose. And I could look at that from another perspective and say, well, really, who benefited from large parts of that economy? And there are claims that there was widespread prosperity. But from what I've seen, large part of that prosperity was concentrated in the stock market, right? A lot of those economic gains was due to this high-tech boom that we experienced, this dot-com bubble that was generating large amounts of wealth for people who were joining these startups. People were feeling rich, and so people were making lots of money in these sort of dot-com booms. And so is this really widespread prosperity, or is this just a bubble that if you did not have capital allocated in the markets, then you weren't really benefiting from all that wealth? Sure, real wages rose in the latter years. I think it was like 96, 97, 98. That was because of the tight labor market, right? Unemployment rate was really low, so people were able to bargain for higher wages and technological changes and gains. Everybody looked at that era and thought like, wow, things are really going great. America had just defeated the Soviet Union, and so that relationship taken care of, right? Russia was joining the League of Nations, and everything was going to be fine. It was all rose. It was all looking like things would be fixed. And it's really interesting. I was thinking about that. And Tom Hartman, of course, rebutted a lot of those Clinton gains, even though he conceded a lot of those economic gains were true and correct. They are facts. Again, I might be off by a couple million on those job numbers, but whatever. They touted 23 million new jobs. I guess if I really drilled out, maybe they weren't. But Tom Hartman was able to bring, at the same time, Clinton stuck to the Reagan mantra of big government is over. He kicked people off the welfare rolls, and then once the economy took a downturn, it really hit families hard. Benefits were cut. Among the lowest Americans, those who are struggling, making $30,000, $40,000 a year, were now paying a price with economic benefits. Clinton doubled the prison population during his 8 years in office and went from 1 million, which was already a staggering high number, to nearly 2 million, 2+ million people, right? And so, again, those are facts. Yeah, it's how do you analyze then Bill Clinton without touting those economic gains and then also the sort of also those regressions that I was talking about. I think interesting how people have to ascribe certain values to that. And I think among some people today, they would say, look, it doesn't matter how good the economy is if you're doing things that are repressing people, that are hurting individuals. You can't just say, well, the economy's great, so let me go in and take away liberty and freedom from certain people, right? That is the interesting part in my mind, right? But, okay, so all of that said, I wanted to go back to Obama because I think it's really interesting that people who are really young, interested in politics, which is great, but then say things like, Obama didn't accomplish anything like major. And it's just like, do people, okay, these kids clearly were too young under Obama. They were like children. But it's also to say like, you didn't accomplish anything major. It's like, do people forget that Obamacare was passed under Barack Obama as president? Nothing major? No, that's major. Look, I've read enough conservative pundits who, while opposing that, were always willing to say, like, this was consequential, this was major, this was a major change and a major accomplishment, something that no previous president, and many had tried. I mean, from Truman on, okay, had tried to pass health care. And it was Barack Obama who did. And so he did nothing major. People forget that pre-existing conditions was an issue that Americans dealt with and died from previously prior to Barack Obama's presidency. So I think it's really interesting that sort of people didn't feel like Obama pushed it enough, like he could have done more. And I agree. However, the analysis fails when people forget that you can't accomplish things unless you have a large majority in the Congresses, right? And it's like, that is why you don't accomplish things, okay? I don't know how many times I have to say this, but I'm going to say this a lot of times in future episodes, and I am going to hit the table that I am recording this episode from. Presidents just don't walk in and say, hey, Hey, I want Medicare for all. And everybody says, oh, you want Medicare for all? Great. You're going to go get it. Great. The president says he's in favor of Medicare for all, so everybody's going to get Medicare for all because the president said so. Are you serious? It is civics education? No, it's just like that's not how this works, okay? So just so people understand, okay? This is now my thesis of why we got healthcare, which was something that had been tried for 60 plus years, okay? This is why. Two things happened, okay? First, the disaster of Iraq, the civil war in Iraq, starting in 2005, 2004, and really took off in 2006 and 7. Okay, what that did is in 2006, the Democrats were able to take over the House and the Senate, and if they didn't already have control of the Senate, but they were able to make gains in the Senate that were transformative because as the war went poorly, the people of America blamed the Republicans and the Republican president and said, yeah, let's go give it to the Democrats. It's like America just votes in Republicans when they want to, go and create some mischief. It's like two kids. Here's the analogy. The Democrats is like the responsible daughter, okay? And the Republicans is like the younger son who creates mischief and breaks things. And like you call one in every time, that something happens. So the young Republican kid breaks some things, you call the older girl, the Democrats, hey, go fix that. And so, okay, that's at least what happened, at least in my mind, partially because of Iraq, right? So it's like Iraq, in that disaster, the people were ready to punish the Republicans in power, okay? Sounds good. Here's the second thing, and this one goes hand in hand with Iraq. The collapse of the economy in 2008. And really leading up to that, this was huge. This was a major economic crisis because it challenged the very premise of free market neoliberal economics, right? It challenged that. And once you challenge free market economics and you tell people, hey guys, that free market's less government thing? Yeah, we're going to have to kick that to the curb, or we're going to have to intervene in the credit markets and in the banking system and all of these things, because if we don't, according to the two brightest economists, we won't have an economy on Monday. It will be the barter system, okay? You'll be getting things by bartering away your blood or something like that, okay? So people forget that it was the combination of Iraq collapsing plus the collapse of belief and trust in this sort of free market economy that caused the government to begin to intervene in large ways in the credit market system, massive amounts of bailouts. People tout figures in the trillions. I'd rather spend a whole episode talking specifically about that, but yes, there was trillions of dollars in secret guaranteed loans to the banking system by the Federal Reserve. But it's that combination that allowed there to be 60 Democratic senators. And don't forget, many of them were from more conservative areas. Nebraska comes to mind. You had those two sort of global events coming together at the perfect time when we had an election in 2008 that allowed Barack Obama not only to win, and he won across the board in a large-scale victory, but it also allowed the Democrats to control both houses of the legislature. And that was key, because without that, there is no health care. And don't forget, healthcare is 1/6 of the economy. It's pretty big. So any changes on that is really complex. Obama had tons of political capital because of those two events and his big victory, that he expended, I would say, a large amount of that political capital, if not everything, on healthcare. And it succeeded and passed. Look, if people think, oh, he didn't try hard enough for single payer. He didn't have the votes for single payer. I don't know why people can't understand that. It's like you think the Democrats is one party where everyone elected believes in the same thing. No, believe it or not, that does not happen. Democrats got to 60 senators, and because many of them were elected from more conservative states, and they weren't going to support single payer. It's interesting on Obama's sort of dealing with the economy and healthcare. He had to do, in my view, a better job of controlling the narrative. That I give credit to Republicans. They tend to do a much better job at controlling the narrative and staying on message. The Democrats, it's like It's like a party of just like, bring them all in. Yeah, some are pro-war, some are anti-war, some believe that, some believe that. Sort of like, you don't know what the hell this party really stands for and means. And again, people are like, we're a big party tent, and that's great. But it seems like America doesn't really care if you're a big party tent. They'll vote for, just up and up crazy things all the time. And they're like, well, that party stands for something, so I'll stick with that. Even though the things they stand for, I would say a large number of Americans probably don't agree with, but they still side with that. So I think people forget, Obama did accomplish some big things. Healthcare is a big thing. Even if you disagree with it, it's still a big thing. It's not easy to get done. But again, I just feel like he didn't tout it well enough. It's like the government's main problem is it can't market its own success. It's like a marketing solution for government problems, right? It's like if the government does something right, it needs to tout and market and actually tell the American people, hey, this is what we're accomplishing, with your taxes. And of course, there are going to be people who say it sucks and it's crap and it's why is the government doing that? It should just give people money. People are always going to know better than the government, which I think is ultimately the greatest populist message, and it's essentially what the Republican Party believes in, is that hey, nothing should be in that commons thing for common needs. Except military, right? And security, and of course a woman's right to choose. But outside of that, but it's to me, it's so fascinating to watch all play out. But I almost wanted to tell people that like people forget that in a democracy, this is important. This is my important takeaway here. Okay. People don't get to get elected into office and just do whatever they want. They have to push for things. And I'll tell you this right now. If Bernie Sanders wins the Democratic nomination, and let's just say he runs the best campaign ever, he excites the base, people go out there, it's a record number of people go and vote for Bernie Sanders, and he wins the presidency, okay? He doesn't get to immediately from day one bring about single payer. Like, that's not how it works. And I can guarantee you, like anything else in this world, that the Republicans will filibuster that from the first second it's proposed. And they don't care. They will hold the Senate and block that, even if it passes the House, which it probably would nowadays, because single payer has become more popular among Democrats. That doesn't mean it's the only program that could achieve coverage for everybody, but it is certainly the most popular program by far. What can you say about that? That is where the Democratic Party has moved to, largely because of Warren and Bernie Sanders. Although, according to the initial figures, and of course this is used to scare people, it's like it's going to cost $3 trillion a year for 10 years. So is that true? That might be an initial upfront cost. There's probably huge amounts of savings in that. So I'm not entirely sure I buy that it's going to be a full $3 trillion cost. It's like where is the savings among the healthcare? That is touted by those who propose single payer. So if the cost is $3 trillion, like what are you saving is I think a key part of single payer that is rarely discussed about. And I don't know why Bernie doesn't talk about how much single payer will save. He sort of just says we need to do it because everybody else can do it who is a developed country around the world. And it's like, yeah, that's true. But you should be touting the specifics of how much you'll actually save in healthcare costs in this country by going down the single payer route, which is essentially the Canadian model. And so you'd still have private hospitals, but the government would be the insurer. To me, in my view of this, is that I don't care if it's single payer. As long as it's a universal coverage for everybody and we stop with the games. At this point, the health insurance companies are just, they're just not, like from personal experience, they just, the way they charge people for health insurance is just ridiculous. It is so costly, the monthly premiums that you pay. We do need a new healthcare system. And if single payer is the system people overwhelmingly support, we'll try and see what happens. I would obviously be in favor of it. Of course, there is one big contention here that I forget, is that a lot of these countries that have these universal healthcare systems also tend to have a lot fewer people. And can you imagine what the cost would be if we do single payer now, and as the population lives longer and ages, would that not cause the government to just spend trillions and trillions of dollars in covering healthcare costs? Look, so in that front, it's like there would have to be major tax hikes across the board. And then Bernie touts that, hey, your tax hikes are going to be less than the premiums you're paying, so you're better off. Believe it or not, we should have supported Nixon's healthcare plan, which was pretty comprehensive, but that would have been back in the 70s. And Nixon had a radical progressive healthcare program, and people should have passed that back then. We shouldn't be having this crisis right now. But yeah, so insurance companies, and the rates they charge, which is just profit, they're just taking people's money and making profits from it. Look, I am not a healthcare expert, and I really gotta dig in to see what would be the ideal healthcare program, given America's situation. But regardless, at this point, we need the ability to have quality health insurance, and be able to, if you lose your job or you transition to a new career, a new job, you shouldn't have to struggle to get on healthcare. Yeah, sure, Medicaid does cover it, but there's some gaps in that. It just needs to be a right. At this point, it just needs to be a right, because it's healthcare. It's not like it's something else. It's so basic to human life. It should have been resolved a long time ago. Okay, let's just count that as collateral banter. Why not? That is episode 50. Yeah, I just spoke from the heart today. So I am back. I will produce a couple more episodes this week, next week. So I'll go back to my once a week, at least 3 or 4 a month podcast. Hope to have a couple people on. Yeah, and obviously continue my conversation on democracy and crisis that exists today, and continue that conversation. All right, Collateral Banter, episode 50. Thank you for listening. Appreciate it. And more to come. Thanks again.